Great. My name is Alex Cornell DeHue, and I work with elected officials to protect America as the president and co-founder. I was a state representative in Maine as well. Elected officials to protect America, we educate, we train, and mobilize lawmakers across the nation who care deeply about protecting our planet and people. And right now, there's a lot of protecting to be done because the United Nations reported that the world's suffered about 75% more extreme weather disasters during the last 20 years, this last 20 years than the previous 20. And that resulted in economic damage up to 2.97 trillion. But even more disturbingly, the climate crisis is making the spread of disease and pandemics more likely. As drought and habitat destruction increases around the world, the connection between animals and humans becomes even more common. And as a result, diseases are jumping between animals to humans. So prior to the pandemic, half the world's hospital beds were occupied by patients with diseases from contaminated water. Sadly, this can only get worse unless we act. By the end of the century, almost the entire world's population could be exposed to mosquito-borne diseases. And the mosquito is the world's deadliest animal. So this and many other reasons exemplify the reasons for the absolute necessary to pass a climate emergency plan that is urgent and significant and makes a difference to all communities. And our climate emergency plan includes a number of factors that ideally will align with the incoming administration. To declare a national climate emergency and align policies to address the scale of the crisis, ensure everyone has access to clean and safe drinking water, invest and build in resiliency in frontline communities injured by pollution and the climate emergency, especially indigenous, Black, and brown economically vulnerable communities, to phase out toxins and single-use plastics, transition to renewed regenerative agriculture, investing in accessible and affordable clean transportation, phasing out the production, the use of dirty energy, improving building industrial and appliances, and prevent foreign states from extracting US water, and transitioning to 100% clean energy to create a clean energy economy. These are examples of what needs to happen under a new climate emergency plan. It doesn't include everything. And so we have elected officials from across the US who are working on this right now, and they've put innovative ideas forward that are making a difference now. But to really make the impact, we need a federal climate emergency plan. And so we'll kick this off with Carmen Ramirez, who is a California supervisor-elect in Ventura County. And it's been inspiring to see what she's been doing, fighting back the fossil fuel industry in her region.
We say around my neighborhood, buenos dias a todos. I've had the honor of being an Oxnard City Council person for the last 10 years. And as a matter of fact, today is my last official meeting because I am transitioning to be a Ventura County supervisor representing my area. And what I want to say is that we've had tremendous success in actually not just pushing back, but encouraging new industry that's clean and renewable. Once the community has gotten involved, because we always need our community to back us up when we want to do anything. We, in this community, decided we did not want an obsolete fossil fuel plant on our Oxnard coast, which we've already had two for 50 years. And we said, our community said, farm workers, Spanish-speaking people, immigrants, a huge community said, no, we want something modern. Now we have in the works, under construction, 100 megawatt battery storage facility, which is going to replace that aging Hulk. Always reminds me of the Lord of the Rings vision of industrial waste on our coastline. We're going to get it back. So I've been really energized by this group. I always say we are the people that later on in the future are going to ask, did you do the right thing for the future? Did you do the right thing for our health? Because it's all about the health of people and therefore the health of the planet. and every living thing on it. I pulled out to inspire me a photo of my family back in 54 or something. I'm this one, this little one, with my brothers and sisters and my mom. We grew up in Pico Rivera in San Gabriel Valley, and we just enjoyed the life of playing in the mud every day, going for walks in our local riverbed, doing the things that now you can't do so easily. And then later we find out the water that we were drinking was totally polluted with a jet fuel. And what now it's a huge cost to clean it up. So their jobs in cleanup, we have to do better for today's people and tomorrow's generations. And I'm really so pleased to be with other inspiring leaders here. You're going to meet them. I know some of them. And this is a movement that is going to take the country to higher places, more modern. And we want to encourage the new administration, our new president, thank you, to do the right thing for all of us and for our future. So I'm really excited that we're part of this. We're going to push, 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 and we're going to get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. That imagery reminded of coming into Mordor. It really speaks true. I also thought the same thing when we were watching the Kern County oil fields, and you go from a lush, beautiful river and trees, and then just across the river, it's nothing but just dead land and oil fields with flares popping up. Um, so sadly, that is a good description, I'd say, but something we are working on changing. And someone who's been working tirelessly as one of the youngest elected officials across the nation working on this too, is Jenna Wadsworth, North Carolina Wake County Soil and Water Conservation District Supervisor.
My name is Jenna Wadsworth, and I currently serve the 1.2 million people who call Wake County, North Carolina, our capital county home, as the Vice Chair of the Wake County Soil and Water Conservation District Board of Supervisors. I also grew up on a dirt road in rural North Carolina on a hog, cow, chicken, corn, cotton, tobacco, and soybean farm, a farm that I still help run and manage with my father to this day. I had the distinct privilege of being the 2020 Democratic nominee for the office of North Carolina Commissioner of Agriculture. And so I've spent the last 2 years working day in and day out to win the seat so that we could begin to create meaningful change in the agricultural industry in my state. And while we unfortunately did not get the outcome that we had hoped for, I'm still here continuing to fight for all of the issues that were and still are so important to the people who call my state home. Our campaign looked at addressing bold solutions to some of society's biggest issues, including climate change, food insecurity, criminal justice reform, healthcare, and economic freedom. Our race was about ushering in new ideas and transformative opportunities to support our family farmers, strengthen our rural communities, protect our environment, and deliver on our promises to our children. Throughout the campaign, people regularly urged me to tone down my rhetoric and suggested that farmers weren't yet ready to talk about climate change, especially since I ran in a more conservative state and in what is deemed as a more conservative office. Corporate farms fought back and spent outrageous sums of money against me because they were afraid of the actions we would have taken to combat the climate crisis. But this issue is too important to ever back down from. That's why I refuse to take corporate PAC money and sign the No Toxic Money Pledge to signify my commitment not accept any fossil fuel money from their executives or their PACs. I was also the only statewide candidate who signed the pledge in support of ushering in the Green New Deal and creating a just recovery with good paying jobs after COVID. Jobs that would not only make our country safer and more sustainable, but would also allow people to put food on the table. I believe in living my values, and I know that we can no longer sit idly by while large corporations denigrate our natural resources and suffer none of the consequences for doing so. Not only is advocating for climate action morally correct, it is also beneficial to our economy, national security, and the general health and well-being of our people. Without climate action, natural disasters will only grow more intense and more frequent in the coming decades. Hurricanes have devastated North Carolina in recent years, causing intense flooding that has absolutely destroyed farms. Florence alone killed 5,500 hogs and 3.4 million chickens. And the Department of Agriculture implemented a swine floodplain buyout plan to provide relief to farmers, but only 43 farms have benefited since the program was created, leaving many without aid. In fact, according to PBS News, over 100 farms have wanted to participate in the buyout, but they've been turned away, leaving those farms and their hog operations vulnerable to future natural disasters. I remember all too well the haunting images of school buses submerged in floodwater in Lumberton, a largely indigenous community. And while we're all affected by these natural disasters, it is marginalized communities that disproportionately live with the brunt of the effects of climate change. Addressing this issue will begin to combat environmental racism, which has plagued Black, Indigenous communities and communities of color for far too long. These folks are more likely to suffer the consequences of pollution and environmental degradation. If we don't take steps to address the climate crisis immediately, we will also continue to see mounting food insecurity across the country, which will again disproportionately affect socioeconomically disadvantaged folks. We now have an opportunity to address the root cause of many of the problems that our farming community faces. And the plans laid out by President-elect Joe Biden at the DNC are our best chance at saving our agricultural industry in Western North Carolina and across the state as a whole. We must hold our elected officials accountable and ensure that their priorities mirror the priorities of the people that they are serving. I call on the Biden administration to follow through with these plans to take bold climate action. This means making meaningful investments in communities on the front lines of the environmental justice movement. It means aiding our farmers in transitioning to more sustainable agricultural practices, including regenerative agriculture and carbon capture, and ensuring that everyone has access to clean and safe drinking water. We can begin by giving our farmers the tools necessary to compete in the global marketplace long term. Biden's plan for rural America provides low-cost financing for new equipment, research and development, and support to develop new and diverse income streams. It's not enough to cut farmers a relief check every single time a natural disaster ravages their land. We must build resiliency into our systems, creating jobs and preventing further local environmental damage as we do it. Everything is interconnected. We have to recognize the reality of the world we're living in, and that means that understanding that climate change is an issue we must address now. I only hope that it is not too late. To know that this is an issue and look the other way is irresponsible, it is reckless, and it is a dereliction of duty on behalf of our elected officials, corporate leaders, and anyone who has the ability to influence and enact real change. Leadership starts at the top. Until we begin to elect leaders who are adamant about addressing climate change, things won't get better. We must do absolutely everything in our power to fight back against the climate crisis if we want a future that offers hope, prosperity, and good health to the generations that will come after us. While we weren't victorious in my race, that will not deter me from continuing the fight for climate action alongside folks like the ones speaking on this call today. We're fighting for our future, for our children, and for our planet, and I can't imagine a more important fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna. The point you make about looking at how our food security is tied to climate change and the climate crisis, I think is an important one that not a lot of people make the connection to. I'd love to now introduce Karen Fitzpatrick, Atlantic County, New Jersey Commissioner.
Thank you, Alex. It's wonderful to be here with all of these climate proactive elected officials, and I note that we're all women. So that's wonderful. Thanks for stepping up, ladies. I am from New Jersey, the southern part of New Jersey, and although New Jersey is the most densely populated state in the Union, there's a reason we're called the Garden State, and I live in the Garden. In the southern 7 counties of New Jersey, we have rural communities, suburban communities, and some urban communities. As Jenna said, climate change is disproportionately affecting communities of color. And that problem is showing itself in flooding here in Atlantic County, which I represent. The economic driver of Atlantic County is Atlantic City, where we have gambling casinos and a very robust tourism industry, at least robust until COVID shut it down last year. The problem is that climate change causing flooding is impacting our economic driver. Atlantic City is on an island, and at least once a month, previously, prior to the most severe recent climate change that we've been experiencing, given a high tide and a bad storm, you might be rerouted in your route to Atlantic City and have to take a different road. But now that happens more like 2 to 3 times a month. It doesn't take a big storm. It doesn't even take a full moon. And to have what we call our guests come to our area to support our economy in its most engaging industry, and have them not be able to cross a road because the bay is coming up into the road because of climate change is inconceivable. How can we be good hosts? How can our economy thrive if we can't even show our visitors the way into town? It's a practical situation here. It's not theoretical at all. The flooding is increasing on a monthly basis, and that impacts employment. It impacts the ability of children to go to school. Sometimes they can't even step out their door because their yard is flooded with 6 or more inches of salt water. This impacts people's vehicles. I used to have to park in a garage that regularly flooded, and it killed our cars. We have the highest rate of unemployment in the country now due to the COVID pandemic, 34%. 1 out of every 3 people in Atlantic County is out of work who wish to work. We're just starting to recover from the housing bubble that burst in 2008. It's now 2020. And last year, the first quarter of 2020, we were well on our way to a successful year, something that we've been working toward for more than a decade since the housing bubble burst. And now here we are, back again, high unemployment, an inability to let our people work, and our major economy in trouble because of flooding due to climate change. So yes, I'm calling on our federal government. The main artery into Atlantic City is a problem because it's a state road. It's also a federal highway. So it's everybody's responsibility and no one's responsibility. So I'm calling on our Congressman, Jeff Van Drew, to help secure funding to raise that road, which happens to go into a community of color. And I don't want to assume that that's the reason we're not getting funding. But I'm going to find out, and it is my mission as a representative of all the people of Atlantic County to fight this problem and improve access to our economic driver, which will improve all the lives in Atlantic County. Thanks.
Thank you, Karen. That's a really good point to mention how the climate crisis is already right now disrupting our communities through sea level and nuisance flooding. And it's happening all throughout the Northeast, where the Northeast actually is rising almost faster than anywhere in the world, which is pretty scary.
Right. And can you believe children can't go to school
Yeah.
when they could, because they were flooded in? It's outrageous.
Yeah, we're used to snow days, not
Right,
sea level.
not flood days.
Yeah, snow days, not flood days. Wow. So we'd love to move down the coast, though, to Daniel Adams, North Carolina, Durham County Soil and Water Conservation District Supervisor.
Greetings, y'all. I am now a former Soil and Water Conservation District Supervisor after 12 years. My last day was last Monday, but I still continue the fight for our planet. And as you can see, with over 130 elected officials at every different level of office, that we recognize that this climate crisis is not contained by borders. It's not contained in coastal communities. And I can attest to that as a recent transplant to the Denver metro area, that the same issues we face in coastal communities and in coastal states, California, New Jersey, North Carolina, they face here in the Mountain West as well. And I'm just really grateful to be on this call with so many powerful women who were elected and serving their communities, and the other individuals who've signed on to demand that we have a federal plan. And we need a federal plan because we don't have the resources that we need to protect the vulnerable communities and build the resiliency and the plans that we need to protect our natural resources and protect our people and planet. I've been serving for 12 years and really focusing on communities of color in North Carolina in my service. For 10 of the 12 years I served, I was the only Black woman serving as a soil and water conservation district supervisor in the state of North Carolina. And what we've seen with COVID is that it is communities of color, it is people of color who are mostly impacted by the devastating effects of global infectious disease, natural disasters, increased severity of storms, flooding, economic depression, and access to food and food insecurity. We have to right this, and the way we do that is with federal legislation. It's by joining our global community partners in the Paris Accords and rejoining our efforts globally to fight our climate crisis. COVID has shown us that it is children who are impacted in North Carolina. A quarter of the children are food insecure. And with schools shutting down because of the pandemic, those students lost access to reliable meal sources. Local elected officials, like the ones on this call, stepped up to ensure that those food parcels were able to still get to those students. But our climate crisis shouldn't be those who can survive because they have money and those who are left behind because they do not. And that's what we're seeing right now. It's seeing here in the Mountain West with Native and Indigenous communities that are impacted by scarcity of wild game and lack of access to clean water that's being sold off to global fossil fuel communities. We have to work together. We have to demand action of our federal government. If we don't act now, it'll be too late. Black and brown Indigenous communities are already suffering the dire impacts. We are dying at disproportionate rates because of infectious disease. We are dying because of hunger. We are dying because of preventable issues that our government can take a hold of and be proactive in preventing. Access to healthcare, access to food, clean water, to housing, to jobs, to economic security. The elected officials who have signed on making this demand of the new Biden administration and the federal government we're here because we see it firsthand. We see it every day. So I'm really glad to be joining our folks in our demands. We demand access for all people, our coastal communities, our inland communities, whether you're in the Mountain West, whether you're in the Midwest, or on a coastal community facing rising sea levels, facing a global infectious disease pandemic, facing insecurity of food. We're all working together in this fight and demanding this action.
Thank you, Danielle. It is very true that right now people are dying because of preventable things that the government can and should be doing. If you're a member of the media, please feel free to put your question in the Q&A box, or after we're done here, we can bring you into the chat as well. And I'd love to introduce our final speaker here, Megan Sally Wells, California council member and mayor of Culver City. And as of today, I think the first press conference post formally elected.
Thank you, Alex, and thanks everybody for tuning in. It's a pleasure to be here and speak alongside such inspirational leaders from across the nation. So my name is Megan Sally Wells, and as Alex said, my term of office just ended last night. I had 6 years on the city council and 2 years as mayor. So yes, this is my very first event as a former elected official. Boy, 2020 has been the most challenging and chaotic year we've collectively experienced in most of our lifetimes. And yet, communities were still able to make great progress for environmental justice. As a founding California co-chair of Elected Officials to Protect America, I helped organize more than 300 mayors, county legislators, and council members across the state of California to urge Governor Newsom to end oil and gas drilling statewide. As local elected officials, we know that we can't fight climate change and environmental racism if we're permitting new wells to be drilled, wells that will perpetuate greenhouse gas emissions and the pollution that's devastating our communities and making them even more vulnerable to COVID-19. And as unfortunately as green as California likes to think it is, and in many cases is, you know, the fact of the matter is that our governor is still allowing new wells to be drilled. But our local leaders are bold and we're making a difference. I'll give you an example from my city of Culver City. We're already running on 100% renewable energy with the Clean Power Alliance, and we're creating good union jobs to power our community and over 30 other cities, plus LA County and Ventura County, where Carmen is, in the process. We're also phasing out oil drilling in the Culver City portion of the Inglewood oil field. This is the largest urban oil field in the United States. And we're creating a city that is less dependent on fossil fuels with progressive transportation, housing, energy, waste, and water policies. So we're doing this in Little Culver City on the West Coast, but we can also do it in the rest of the state and my hope in the entire nation. Just as in California, we're asking Governor Newsom for bold action to protect our communities. Nationwide, Elected Officials to Protect America has, where our letter has over 130 signatories urging President-elect Biden to prioritize a national climate plan and employ hundreds of thousands of transitioning America to a green energy economy. So all of us here, we're all calling on President-elect and Congress to develop a federal climate emergency plan that can include transitioning to 100% clean energy, ensuring that everyone has access to clean and safe water, investment in communities on the front lines of environmental injustice, including Indigenous communities of color and the economically vulnerable. Sorry, our meeting was late last night. Investment in clean, accessible, and affordable transportation systems, investment in a smart renewable energy grid, transition to regenerative agriculture, phase out of plastics and toxins that threaten our global oxygen supply, prevent foreign entities from unsustainably extracting US water, improving building energy efficiency, divesting and phasing out fossil fuels, and investing in new technologies. America must lead the world in protecting everyone from the climate emergency. I am happy and proud to be in this fight with all of you and certainly everybody on this call. I love to see your leadership, and together we are going to get it done.
Thank you, Megan. It is truly inspiring to see little Culver City make such an amazingly huge impact nationwide, because it's not so little in the end. So with that, we will go to some of the questions here. We have a question saying the global pandemic has exposed many policy and procedural issues across multiple areas. Why so many suffering from the financial impacts? How does focusing on the climate crisis help them? So why should we focus on the helping combat climate change while we have a financial crisis and pandemic?
I'll jump in. I mean, what we see on the front lines, the communities we represent, are the immediate effects of these, extractive, polluting practices. And so, we really tie this into the immediate health effects and negative health effects that are made much worse with COVID-19. It makes, when you live next to an oil rig, your system is already compromised. And that makes you more likely to be a victim and have a worse case of COVID-19. So it's not like some sort of like pie in the sky future, theory that we're talking about. We're talking about immediate health effects that are impacting our communities and making, literally killing them. And so I think what local officials bring to the table is real life examples of things that are happening in our communities to our constituents. And, and furthermore, we're also seeing climate impacts today. This is not a drill. This is not a theory. This is not something that's happening in the far future. California continues to burn every single year. And we used to talk about fire seasons. There's no fire season anymore. It's all the time. And again, that compounds all of those climate impacts on the health impacts, where we've gotten the worst air quality despite having less driving. So there are just a million reasons, and all of our communities attest to the need for immediate action.
Absolutely. The Harvard did a study that showed the air quality is affecting people's vulnerability to COVID significantly, and unfortunately, particularly twice as much for underrepresented communities. All right. So, on the 5-year anniversary of the Paris Accord, how have states and local government contributed to the goals despite U.S. withdrawal? Has enough progress been made to really make a difference here?
Can I say something? I mentioned earlier in my comments what our city did, and that is really something that I think we need to take a look at what we can do locally, just as what Megan accomplished in Culver City. We had to really look for answers locally, and how disappointing to know that our current president thought so little about the future of our country, and I always say of his own family, to withdraw this country from the Paris Accords. And so we had to pick it up. And for example, what we did here in Oxnard, Ventura County, is established limits for new oil drilling. Now that is being challenged by the oil industry. Our board of supervisors, which I'm going to join, set a 2,500 foot limit from homes and schools and hospitals for oil drilling. It's actually a baby step, something we should do way more than that. But it's the kind of thing that was opposed by and continues to be opposed by oil industry. So I really want to mention this issue, and it affected me in my campaign for this seat. The oil industry is having to transition, and they need to clean up what they've left behind for taxpayers all over this country to fix. But instead of doing that, they try to get their way through policy, by getting people elected who will do their bidding and not recognize the responsibility we all have to the health of our community. So we've been able to do some things locally. We're always challenged by the toxic industries, the fossil fuel industry, for what we're doing because they want to delay it. So community organizing at every level is very important to get the right people elected who will do the bold things that all of us have been talking about. That is so easy to say, well, look, I'll leave that for someone else to do in the future. It's time is of the essence. So we locally have been doing it. Some of us take the risk and fail to reach our goal, but in the process, we are educating our community about the health consequences of not doing the right thing in terms of going to renewable energy, cleaning up what has been left, as particularly for low-income communities to clean up or suffer the consequences. Too many examples of that to give. So we've been trying to do that. Can't always get it done, but we have to keep working on it locally and at the state level and certainly at the federal level.
Alex, I can jump in for a second if that's okay.
That'd be wonderful.
Sure. Well, here in New Jersey, we are moving toward renewable energy as far as transportation is concerned, and also wind energy. We're fortunate right now to have a very progressive governor, Phil Murphy, and he's on top of this. A fairer and better New Jersey is his tagline. And a couple of years ago, I proposed at our county board that I thought we should be replacing and phasing out our gas-powered passenger vehicles for department heads at the county level and replacing them with electric vehicles. And, they didn't want to hear it. I'm in the minority, so all I can do is, bring up ideas and see how they stick to the wall. So now Governor Murphy has instituted discounts for municipalities and governments and put electric vehicles on the state contracting list. So the argument, it's too expensive, we can't afford it, is no longer there. And lo and behold, within the last month, our county did purchase 2 electric vehicles to replace gas-powered vehicles. So I'm pretty pleased about that. And additionally, we have what was stalled for a number of years with former Governor Chris Christie, a very large wind farm off the coast of southern New Jersey is being built, and that's going to power, it's going to power more than just Atlantic County completely, have enough energy to do that, but also use the infrastructure of a former utility plant that has, the pipeline to all individual needs of power. And instead of burning coal, or they had been burning tires there, instead of burning fossil fuel, they'll be using wind energy from the ocean farm, and piping it into people's homes and businesses with infrastructure that's already there. And it's clean energy. It's providing a lot of great jobs, and I'm very happy, and we're very happy to see that here. So we're trying.
Now that brings up 2 really important points, right? It's really at the local and state level, the ability to identify where fossil fuel and other industries have left their pollution, and being able to clean it up, make sure that the policies at the federal and higher levels provide programs, but getting it implemented at the local level is unbelievably important for local officials to be able to know about and focus on. And this kind of gets to our next question. We're talking about being on the minority on the council. What is the best way to communicate with conservative individuals who don't believe in climate change? With previous climate legislation failing in Congress, how do we get more members on board to confront this crisis?
Well, since I am in the minority, I'll start. You have to give people a graceful exit. Just by bringing forth the idea could be big news to them, because a lot of, we are all living in a bubble right now. The way social media is segregating us, you get the news you want to get, and not necessarily all the whole picture. So just by mentioning and opening a non-judgmental conversation I've found is a way to start, and it doesn't put people on the defensive, and intelligent people will see this. That they will know that this is the right thing to do, because we can't continue the way we are. Everybody knows the road is flooding. Is it because the road is sinking? Well, maybe that's due to climate change. Is it because the bay is flooding? Well, maybe that's due to climate change. It's not happening by accident. And all you have to do, or what I've been trying to do, is just start a conversation. And it may take a little while, but when I saw 2 Nissan Leafs in the county parking lot, I couldn't believe it. I thought, wow, you just have to keep talking about it, and they'll understand.
Can I add something here really quickly? We are really sometimes confronted with people who just don't make any sense. But I do think what resonates with people is, for example, I always say, the Department of Defense considers climate change a national security threat. We have a naval air station here, and they have already done a strategic retreat of one of the runways for the aircraft that they are using. And I always say, who am I to deny what's happening when the Department of Defense says the same thing? The other thing that's happening is insurance is being less available to people living in flooding areas, such as along the coastline, or fire-prone areas. And these are market issues that are going to affect everybody. And to deny what the market sees coming, also people are divesting from fossil fuels. I think these are good ways to open those conversations. And I always like to say, we want to be modern. We don't want to be stuck in the horse and buggy when we see what's coming for the industry, for transportation and everything else. So I like to focus on the modern and on the financial impacts of climate change, which is going to affect everybody. So let's get ahead of it and not be caught looking.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I may add,
Please.
so one of the driving forces behind me seeking higher office and running for Commissioner of Agriculture was my desire to meaningfully address the climate crisis head on, which I believe will be the biggest and most pressing issue facing every single one of us and generations of folks to come. I ran for Commissioner of Agriculture because after growing up on a farm and working with small farmers for over a decade in my current elected office, I've seen just how hard it has become to do an already very hard job because of the effects of climate change largely going unchecked and undealt with. I ran against a 16-year entrenched Republican incumbent who, by the way, didn't believe that climate change was real. And, I said earlier in my remarks that leadership starts at the top. Until you begin to elect people who understand that addressing the climate crisis is an urgent priority and who are willing to do that work head on, it's going to be very hard for things to ever change. That doesn't mean that they won't change, and every bit of incremental progress is still progress, but this problem is so severe and we are at an absolute tipping point that we can't wait any longer for big solutions to these very big pressing issues. I know someone else asked, another reporter maybe asked in the chat about how we combat the influence of the fossil fuel industry or big money in changing how we begin to address these issues in society. I had these, big ag, corporate ag, factory farming organizations and fossil fuel organizations spend upwards of $1 million against me in the last month and a half of my race to protect someone who, by the way, has done nothing but to support them and help enhance their corporate profit margins for over a decade. These industries, these corporate farms, the fossil fuel industry do nothing but denigrate our environment and natural resources while suffering none of the consequences for doing so. They also, commit labor atrocities, especially amongst Latinx farm workers in these meat packing plants where we've seen disproportionately higher rates of COVID-19 outbreaks than in the general population. And we've seen increased rates of air pollution resulting in asthma and other breathing difficulties for African American residents who happen to live within so many miles of these factory farming organizations. And at the same time, these companies also don't prioritize animal welfare and sustainability and resiliency. And I kept saying these companies, these organizations do not have the best interests of our residents, of our people at heart. And as soon as it's cheaper to go somewhere else, to relocate somewhere else where they don't have to comply with the same labor or environmental standards, they'll absolutely do that, and they'll leave communities upended. That means, you won't be able to put food on your table. And so it is absolutely critical when we're talking about addressing climate change and talking to folks who maybe aren't yet on the same page as us, explaining how this, not addressing climate change will absolutely affect them economically. It will affect their communities. Whereas if we bring in the Green New Deal and usher in green, good paying union jobs that make sure that we can enhance the quality of life, the health and well-being of their citizenry, reduce brain drain, create other new economic opportunities, and absolutely revitalize rural areas, while also making sure that we have the money necessary to make those important community investments like broadband access and more healthcare facilities that could absolutely radically transform communities and make where you live the best place possible to raise a family. The other thing I just want to say is, in Western North Carolina, in our mountains, we've seen data that shows that by the year 2050, temperatures could rise 2 to 5 degrees, and that will be absolutely detrimental to some of the industries that depend upon a colder climate in order to be successful. That includes everything from our Christmas tree growers, and we're the number 2 Christmas tree grower in the country. Given that this is this time of year, I think it's important to center. We're also, a top grower of wine, of hops, and everything else, and apples. And those industries will be absolutely decimated by an increase in temperatures. Additionally, we're already seeing apple orchard owners who are having difficulty securing crop insurance right now because of unpredictable blooming seasons, again, as a result of climate change. So unless we begin to meaningfully mitigate the effects of natural disasters, of the climate crisis, the agricultural industry, as it looks now, largely won't have a future. And so, when you talk to people who are in a more conservative industry, let's talk about the economics of not addressing this problem.
And it's amazing how it's all connected. So thank you, Jenna, for bringing that together. So this kind of goes into the, we think time for one or two more here. Looking at soil and water conservation for Supervisor Adams and Wadsworth. What were your top challenges regarding climate change when you're looking at soil and water conservation? And I would maybe add maybe potential solutions too.
For us, it was growing as a city. More people are moving back into urban areas, and that put a strain on our water resources. And as a northern neighbor to Jenna's Wake County, one of the things that we definitely had to deal with was the combination of drought years and the increase of nitrogen and phosphorus in our drinking water supply because of urban runoff, which was directly connected to heat island effects of our losing our tree canopy and larger storms coming down because of our climate and putting those pollutants into our water. My city is at the headwaters of her city's drinking water supply, and we are in a decades-long process of being able to remove those nutrients and those pollutants from the water so that her community is able to be able to access clean, healthy drinking water for their growing population. Her 1.2 million constituents, 500,000 of those, if not more, are concentrated in one city in her county. And then the impacts trickle down over that. Then we have to be conscious of the fact that her drinking water supply also lake is the lifeblood of the entire eastern part of our state. So making sure that the drought conditions and that water is able to trickle down to the eastern part of our state to improve our access to our aquaculture and make sure our down east residents and neighbors have access also to clean, healthy drinking water. It is a cycle. Water is cyclical, and that's what we're having to combat. How do we put in buffers? How do we put in measures that combat the greed of the real estate industry and people wanting to put in commercial properties on fertile, bountiful rural land, the increased populations and the strains on the already limited water supplies that we have? How do we fix all of that in that cycle? And on top of that, we have to deal with how do we protect our farming and our access to local food. And that connects with how do we protect our pollinators and make sure that we have access to the pollinators that are then able to help our food grow, and that we make sure that our farmers are not priced out of their properties, that they're not being bought out by real estate developers because of the growing demand and needs on our land, and that we have the ability for them to be able to then have suppliers and have folks purchase their food, and that it's not too priced out in a consumer system that also doesn't make sense in our capitalist society. So as soil and water supervisors, it's our job to fight to put in our best management practices to make sure that we're educating our community, that we're rebuilding our tree canopies in our rural areas and in our urban centers, and that we're focusing on how do we reduce those nutrients, whether through rules or protections or voluntary production programs, to make sure that the drinking water supply is well for the folks who are putting the demand on those systems. So it's a working partnership, but it is really tied and connected to how we treat our planet and what our global climate actions are. And it's a local it's a local microcosm of a greater problem that exists.
Supervisor Adams, my dear friend and mentor, just gave such a phenomenally thorough overview of many of the issues that we're facing and the ways that we've gone about addressing them. And what she didn't mention is that, you know, many times we have actually collaborated, our soil and water districts, on projects and grant opportunities in order to address farmland issues or erosion issues and stormwater management issues. One of the biggest issues that we're facing in my county is farmland preservation. And, you know, we're absolutely ecstatic that so many people want to call Wake County home. And we have so many people moving in every single day about the net gain of a new kindergarten class full of folks moving into the county every day. And, you know, what that means that we're seeing a lot of unchecked and unregulated development. So we're having these really important conversations with folks about sustainable development and trying to parse, you know, this idea that developers and the environmental community, farmers, that we can all work together in order to achieve goals that create a healthier and more sound and more livable community moving forward. We're also always looking at solutions and ways to provide aid and educational resources to our farmers in order to install these best management practices that allow farmers to put conservation first while remaining economically viable for the long term. A big priority of mine, not just in this current office, but in running statewide, was talking about building more sustainable, local, resilient food systems. COVID-19 has shown us that one of the biggest problems that we are facing in this country is consolidation within the agricultural industry. It is making us vulnerable to national security issues because it is making us vulnerable to wide-scale food insecurity in this country. And so, you know, the food system is broken. This is a conversation that all of us should be having, whether or not you directly work in agriculture, because whether or not we have access to put, you know, food on our tables and clothes on our backs is something that affects every single person in this country. And, you know, what's more than that, something that has been a big focus of mine in this role, in this space, has been supporting environmental education programming in both our public and private schools, because I know that it's our children who have to live with the brunt of our inaction in addressing the climate crisis head on. So we're always looking at ways in order to educate and inform the next generation of environmental stewards In our county, everything from scholarship opportunities to poster and educational resource opportunities and hand-on learning opportunities in the fields of conservation. And so, one of the biggest things that all of us can do, whether we're soil and water supervisors or mayors or former elected officials, is call on President-elect Biden and his administration to name the climate crisis as a national emergency, so that way we can begin to use funds necessary to address these very real issues head on.
Thank you. So we have only a couple minutes left, but there are three important questions I'd love to get to. So if we can kind of go through these in a little bit more rapid style. They are a little bit more regionally based. So when we think about in your district, Megan, you were able to pass 100% clean energy programs to power the city. Did it include residential homes, and how did your city get that passed?
Yeah, it's really exciting. And so, yes, it's residential, it's commercial, it's everybody, it's municipal. We are 100%, 100%. And so, most cities, counties, and areas in the United States are served electricity by either like a municipal energy source, like in LA, it's the DWP, the Department of Water and Power. And then the rest of us are served by investor-owned utilities. In other words, when you pay your bill, your electric bill, your money goes to shareholders, right? But then you have this other way, which is ours is called the Clean Power Alliance. It's community choice energy. That's, people call it CCEs. And what we do is we are kind of like a joint powers authority. In our case, it's LA County, Ventura County, and a lot of the independent cities within them that have joined to purchase the energy. And we're elected public boards, right? We're elected officials representing these cities. And rather than the profits from the energy going to shareholders, it gets reinvested back into our communities, bringing community benefits. So we have jobs programs. For us, our big priority is to be environmentally sound. And so we have a 100% option, we have a 50% renewable option, and we have a 38% renewable option. And so cities, depending on, the financial ability, will choose these options. All of them are superior to the investor-owned utility. And our choice was to go with 100%. Our community has been 100% behind it. And it's truly exciting because more and more cities are making this choice. And it's creating jobs. I mean, these are the jobs that are going to save our country, that are going to save our communities, and literally bring people out of the economic crisis that we're experiencing today.
Well, that is absolutely exciting. So moving to the East Coast, we had a question about the transportation climate initiative. How will this feed into the climate emergency plan, fighting climate change overall?
Well, I think that the transportation climate initiative is enlisting and educating leaders in our states. And I think, what do we have, 12 states included in the initiative right now? And it's all about creating a coalition that holds power and can speak to the power that exists in the energy world, creating education and just educating people about why more efficient vehicles and better transportation opportunities are good for our area, especially it's here in the Northeast to begin with. And just getting the word out and building the coalition is going to help us to bring change to our area.
Great. And then finally, we'll just chat a little bit about the New York recently divested from fossil fuels in their pension fund. So does anyone like to comment on that or the possibility of that happening in other places?
I think that's an excellent way to look at things, because you know that the investment is about what's the future profitability. And I think there's not only with New York, but other entities are looking at future profitability and liability. And that's what I was talking about earlier, where the markets determine what is going to be profitable. And when things are obsolete, have huge liabilities, strand people with the remnants of a dirty industry, and they don't take care of people, like the coal industry has not been able to take care of its workers. I think the market and the investment is looking at what is going to work for their portfolios. And we should all be taking a look at our state's investment, our city, county investment strategies, and see what the future portends and make the right choices.
Yeah, absolutely. The oil industry is moving off the S&P 500, and Tesla and other clean companies are moving on to it. So the momentum is there. So with that, I would love to thank everyone for taking the time to join us today. If you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to give me or our press team a call, and we will provide the video clips as well as the transcripts and news clips of this shortly in the upcoming press release. So again, thank you so much for joining us. All right, if the speakers could